At this family's peak, a single crab feast ate up enough silver to feed a farming household for a whole year. Then, just a few years later, on the day the estate was seized, you couldn't find one whole, decent thing left in that huge mansion. And here's the strangest part. The very book that tells this rise and fall leaks the ending early, with one little album, one quiet song. It tells you ahead of time how each girl's story ends. So if the ending is already sitting right there, why have people, for hundreds of years, still not been able to put it down? Why do they still cry their eyes out? Good evening. This is Bedside Book Voice. Tonight, we're reading Dream of the Red Chamber. If you're already lying down, good. Turn the lamp down low, put your phone somewhere you can't reach, and pull the blanket up. You've probably heard of this one. They call it the peak of Chinese fiction, long and hard, with more people in it than you could ever keep straight. Don't worry. Tonight you don't have to remember a thing. We'll go slowly, and I'll just hand you a few images that taste good in the dark. Let's set a small rule first. No need to remember names, no need to follow the family tree, and honestly, no notes. Just follow my voice. What you'll carry away are a few pictures you won't forget. A stone that was never used, sighing alone at the foot of a hill. A girl with a little hoe, burying fallen petals in the earth. And at the very end, in a great snow, one person in a red cloak, who turns, bows once, and walks off with a monk and a priest. If you fall asleep halfway, that's fine. 120 chapters, hundreds of people, you don't have to keep them all. A few pictures is enough. That question from a moment ago, don't rush to answer it. This book tells you the ending very early. Who dies young, who is married off far away, who leaves to become a monk, who scatters in fire and snow. And yet you keep turning the pages anyway. Treat that strange fact like a thin thread, and lay it beside your pillow. Near the end, we'll come back and untie it. For tonight, just hold on to this. Sometimes, even when you know you'll lose it, the having is still worth it. Last time, we read Journey to the West, the story of one person slowly pulling a restless, jumping heart back in, going inward, growing quieter and quieter. Tonight's book runs the other way. It's about a whole crowd of people, living in the cleanest, liveliest garden, turning their days into flowers and brocade, and then watching all that splendor drift apart, like a dream you can't wake from and can't hold. From cultivation to the red dust of the world, we're changing rivers tonight, and the water runs softer. So let's get to know the book. Dream of the Red Chamber was written by Xueqin in the Qing dynasty. It was first called The Story of the Stone. People generally say the first 80 chapters are Chow's own, and the last 40 were continued by someone else, usually credited to a man named Gaoyi. So when you reach the back, the flavor shifts a little. That's a second-handed work. Chow poured his life into this. He said himself he poured over it for 10 years and revised it 5 times. 10 years, going back over the same pages, again and again. At the very start, he wrote 4 lines that almost became the soul of the book, pages full of foolish words, a handful of bitter tears. They all call the author a fool who understands the taste inside? In plain words, this silly-looking story is really my tears, gathered by the handful. Everyone says I'm besotted, but who truly knows what it tasted like in here? Hold on to that line, a handful of bitter tears. It wasn't written. It was wept. Why the weeping? For that, we have to start with the author's own family. Xueqin's family was once all roaring fire and blooming flowers. For 3 generations, they held a post in Jiangning, today's Nanjing, called the Imperial Textile Commissioner, in charge of buying silk for the royal house. The post was rich and respectable, and when the emperor traveled south, he stayed in their home several times, with the family receiving him. Think about that. To have the emperor himself as your houseguest. That is splendor. And that is the nest of wealth where little Xueqin grew up. But that towering wealth vanished overnight. In the Yongzheng years, the Chao family's estate was seized, and in a single night they fell from the clouds into the mud. Chao went down with them, moved to the western edge of Beijing, and grew poorer and poorer. How poor, in the end? Someone recorded a line that his whole house ate gruel, the wine always on credit. A family living on thin porridge, who had to borrow even for a cup of wine. And it was from there, in that state, that he looked back and wrote his family's old splendor. Tell me, could that pen not carry tears? Now, to be fair, a word of caution. Dream of the Red Chamber is not the Chao family's record, you can't match it name for name. The Jia mansion in the book carries the shadow of his own rise and fall, but the people, the events, he crushed them up and shaped them anew. Which part really happened, which part he invented, no one can settle even today. You don't need to play detective for him. What we want tonight is the dream itself. And there's a person called Red Inkstone, who wrote many notes in the margins, like someone who knew the inside story, adding one more layer of fog you can't quite see through. And because those last 40 chapters were continued by another hand, how Chao meant to end it became a riddle for the ages. For more than 200 years, countless people have crawled into this book, studying every name, every margin note, puzzling over the endings he never finished until it grew into a whole field of study, called readology. A novel that keeps people arguing for 2 centuries, there aren't many like that, anywhere in the world. So tonight, leave the arguments alone. Just know this, the book you're hearing is one you can never finish reading, and everyone finds a little of their own heart inside it. So where does this dream begin? It begins with a stone. The story goes that long ago, the goddess Niwa smelted stones to mend the sky, 36,501 of them. She used 36,500, and one single stone was left over, never used, tossed away at the foot of a hill called Blue Ridge Peak. That stone had been through the fire, so it had grown a soul. It could shrink or swell, and it could speak. And thinking how all the other stones went up to mend the sky while it alone was left behind, it sat there day and night, grieving over itself. Remember that stone, the one never used. The book was first named The Story of the Stone, and this is its story. Later a monk and a priest came along, and the stone begged them, "Take me down to that world of flowers and warmth and wealth, just to walk through it once." So they shrank it into a smooth, glowing piece of jade and carried it down. And that jade, later, came into the world inside a baby boy's mouth, born together with him. That boy is Jia Baoyu. That jade is called the magic jade. Born with jade in his mouth, that's what it means. But the stone alone isn't enough. The saddest bond in this whole dream was also tied up in heaven. They say the stone, back when it was up there, was a spirit who often took sweet dew to water a small, half-dead plant, a crimson pearl herb. The plant drank, lived, and slowly grew into the shape of a young woman. She owed him a whole watering's worth of kindness, with no way to repay it. So she made up her mind, if he ever goes down to live as a human, I'll go too, and I'll repay him with all the tears of my life. Then the debt will be clear. Do you see it now? This is where Lin Daiyu comes from. She comes down into the world to repay tears. So all through the book, Daiyu weeps, crying at the smallest thing that isn't her being precious, that's the very thing she came here to do. This bond from heaven, the book calls the Stone-Anwood Pact, the promise between a stone and a plant. One repays a lifetime of tears, one spends a lifetime guarding a piece of jade. From the start, this bond was meant to be repaid and then let go, not to last forever. Tuck that away for now. Right at the opening, the book also hides 2 names worth a smile. One man is called Shiyin, another Yucun. Say them quickly in the original and you hear the joke. Shiyin sounds like true facts hidden away, and Yucun sounds like false words remain. From the first breath, Chao is playing a riddle with you. In this book, true and false are tangled, so don't take it all as real, and don't take it all as fake. There's a line that says it perfectly: when the false is taken for true, the true becomes false, where nothing is made into something, something returns to nothing. This Shiyin began as a country gentleman, money, leisure, and one lovely little daughter. Then the disasters came, one after another. His daughter, watching the lanterns at the Lantern Festival, was stolen away. Then a fire took the house, burning it down to nothing. In one stroke he fell from a respectable man to a broken old one, living off others. One day, on the street, he met a limping priest who sang him a song, the song of one and done. All men know that immortals are good, only fame they can't forget. All men know that immortals are good, only silver they can't let go. Shiyin understood at once. He wrote a short gloss on that song, and in a few lines he summed up the fate of hundreds of people in the whole book. In the noise, you finish your song and I step on stage, and in the end it's all sewing wedding clothes for someone else. Meaning, the people on the stage trade places, scramble and grab, bustle about for nothing, and at the end it was all dowry stitched for strangers. Then he walked off with the priest and left the world. You see? This is barely the opening, and the book has already set the ending gently down in front of you. If that still isn't plain enough, the book has an even more direct moment. Baoyu, once, falls into a dream and wanders into a place called the Land of Illusion. There he finds a row of albums, each page a painting with a few lines of verse, and they are the fates of the very girls around him, one by one. Half understanding, he also hears a suite of songs, titled, of all things, Dream of the Red Chamber. That one chapter shows you, in advance, exactly how these flower-like girls will wither. Take the line about Daiyu and Baochai, a jade belt hangs in the wood, a gold pin is buried in snow. Hold on to the words wood and snow. Lin Daiyu's surname Lin means wood, and Baochai's surname sounds like snow. A jade belt hanging in the wood, a gold pin buried in snow, that's these two girls, one cries herself to death, one is left guarding an empty room. Or the line for Wang Xifeng, she schemed too cleverly by half, and schemed away her own dear life. A woman who calculated everyone, and in the end, the thing she calculated away was her own life. That row of albums has a name, the 12 Beauties of Jinling, the 12 most important young women the book picks out. You don't have to remember them all. Just know that Chao gathered all the different kinds of fine girls from a whole era into one place, and then makes you watch, wide-eyed, as they fall one by one. They all live inside one great family. The Jia clan has two mansions, the Ning house and the Rong house, side by side, and at the top sits the old matriarch, grandmother Jia, kind and weighty with authority, with the whole household turning around her. Picture the Jia family as a great, deep-rooted tree, right now at its most shading, most splendid hour. In that land of illusion, there are two more things with names too clever to miss. The tea they serve guests is called 1,000 Reds in one cave, the wine is called 10,000 Beauties in one cup. They sound elegant until you swap the characters. 1,000 Reds in one cave sounds just like 1,000 Reds weeping. 10,000 beauties in one cup sounds like 10,000 beauties grieving together. The 1,000 Reds and 10,000 beauties are all the fine girls in the book, the weeping and the grief are their shared ending. Chao didn't waste a single name, not even a cup of tea. With all his tenderness, he wrote a crowd of the best people, walking one by one toward the same sad place. With those fated endings told, let's walk back and look at the dream at its most beautiful. The Jia family had a daughter named Yuanchun, who entered the palace and became an imperial consort. As a great favor, the emperor allowed her to come home and visit her family. To receive her this once, the Jia family built an enormous, dazzlingly lavish garden, the famous Grand View Garden. On the night she visited, every lamp was lit, and the wealth reached its very peak. And yet, what do you think Yuanchun herself said? Sitting in all that splendor, she called the palace that place where no one can see you. Don't take that line lightly. Yuanchun is the family's great benefactor, half their standing was won by her, inside that palace. But what about her? Deep halls, strict rules, and a whole year going by without seeing her family more than a handful of times. On the night of her visit, talking with her parents, she could only end up in tears. You see, even climbing that high, to such a glorious seat, all she wanted was to sit with her own people and say a few warm, ordinary words. Wealth looks like the summit from outside, lived from inside, it's often just another cage. Chow pointed at that chill very early. After the visit, it seemed a waste to leave such a fine garden empty, so Yuanchun sent word for her younger brothers and sisters to move in. And so Baoyu, with Lin Daiyu, Baochai, Tanchun, Shangyun, this whole crowd of young people in the bloom of their youth, moved into the Grand View Garden. This stretch is the cleanest, happiest time in the whole book. In the garden they start poetry clubs, match couplets, admire flowers, drink wine, sulk over little things. Picture the garden as a place that shuts all the dirt and weariness of the world outside its walls, a brief, youthful paradise. The most elegant thing these young people did in the garden was to start a poetry club. Every so often they'd gather, set a topic, fix a rhyme, each write a poem, then rank them. Sometimes they sang of white crabapple blossoms, sometimes of chrysanthemums, and when the snow came, they'd circle a little clay stove, roasting venison, tossing line after line back and forth into one long poem. Nothing grand happened in those days, just young people, in their best years, playing in earnest and writing, in earnest, a few useless lines of verse. Yet years later, looking back, it's exactly those worthless hours that turn out to be the most precious of their whole lives. Now I should tell you how the most heart-wrenching pair in this crowd first met. Lin Daiyu's mother had died, and her father sent her to her grandmother's house, the Jiao mansion, to be raised. The first time she stepped into that deep, grand household, she was careful with everything, unwilling to say one extra word or take one extra step, afraid of breaking some rule and being laughed at. And on that very day, she met Baoyu. The moment the two of them came face to face, Baoyu blurted out, "This little sister, I have seen her before." That line, "seen her before, taste it, how lovely." That bond between stone and plant up in heaven, falling into the human world, comes out as a child's blurted, out of nowhere words. Let me tell you about Baoyu. He's the treasure of the Jia family, born with jade in his mouth, the darling of everyone. And yet he simply won't study for office. He hates being told to make a name and rise in the world, and he calls those men who scramble upward career worms, meaning maggots. He once said a famous line, "Girls are made of water, men are made of mud." He loves nothing more than hanging about with the sisters and the maids, thinking of them, worrying they'll be wronged. In an age that said everything is low, only study is high, a person like Baoyu was a complete misfit, an unworthy son in his father's eyes. But think about it, at night all he wants is to protect that bit of cleanness, that bit of beauty around him, and to not grow into the calculating, greasy thing adults become. That kind of good for nothing, seen today, is almost precious. The garden wasn't all flowers and moonlight either. One time, Baoyu got tangled in some trouble outside, and others poured oil on the fire in front of his father. Zheng had a whole chest of disappointment stored up. This son, who wouldn't walk the right road, wouldn't study for office, how would he ever hold up the family? And old grievances and new came rushing together. He pinned Baoyu down and beat him hard with a board, until the skin split and he nearly lost his life. Grandmother Jia rushed over, aching and furious, weeping. That beating wasn't just one boy being struck. It was two generations, two ways of living, slamming into each other, the father wanting standing and a future, the son guarding that bit of truth in his heart. Neither could move the other. That same knot, isn't it still playing out, every day, in homes today? Now back to Lin Daiyu. She came to repay tears, so she's sensitive, given to overthinking, sharp-tongued, often off crying by herself. The taste of living on someone else's charity, she knew better than anyone. However fine the garden, it was never her own home. And yet she had the highest gift and the cleanest heart of them all. There's an image in the book no one has forgotten in hundreds of years. Late spring, fallen petals everywhere, and while everyone else found them dirty, Daiyu carried a little hoe, gathered the petals into a silk bag, picked a clean spot, and buried them in the earth. As she buried the flowers, she chanted a poem, the Song of Burying Flowers. 2 lines cut the deepest. Today I bury the flowers and they laugh at my folly. Who will bury me when my own day comes? Meaning, today I bury these fallen petals and people call me a fool, but one day, when I too fall like these flowers, who will be there to bury me? Listen, it isn't flowers she's burying. It's herself. A girl living on charity, watching flowers open and fall, thinking of her own life with nowhere to land. This passage is best heard slowly, in the dark. You might ask, Baoyu and Daiyu, what was so good between them? There's a scene in the book that's especially lovely. The 2 of them sneak a copy of the Western Chamber, sit side by side under a peach tree, petals falling all over them, and read together that idle book children weren't allowed to touch. What was good between them wasn't matched rank or matched wealth, it was that they understood each other. Everyone else urged Baoyu to chase office and a future, only Daiyu never said such things. In that mansion of rules and calculation, the 2 of them were the one person each could be, with no guard up. The poetry club had one more touching little figure, a girl named Xiangling. Remember Zhen Shirin's daughter from the opening, the one stolen at the Lantern Festival? Round and round, she was sold into the Xue household, renamed Xiangling, and her life was bitter indeed. Yet she was wild for poetry, clinging to Daiyu to teach her. To work out a single line, she'd forget to eat, forget to drink, and even asleep her lips kept moving until she really did write lines the others clapped for. You see, a girl ground to pieces by fate could still, in a few lines of verse, win herself one small clean patch of sky. That's one of the most heartbreaking, most admirable lights in the whole book. Baoyu and Daiyu weren't all sweetness, day in and day out, either. The 2 of them loved to bicker over some tiny thing, you upset me, I cry over you, until it blew up, and then they made up again. Why? Precisely because they cared too much. Daiyu always feared Baoyu still kept someone else in his heart. Baoyu always blamed Daiyu for not trusting him. There's an old phrase, ruin from wanting it whole. The more you want something perfect, the easier it is to wound each other over little things. If you've ever tangled like this with someone you love most, you'll understand them. Under all those quarrels lies one sentence, never spoken aloud, I'm just so afraid of losing you. There's another passage people often skip, and it's warm. Daiyu had always treated Baochai as a rival, guarding against her at every turn. But once, when Daiyu was ill, Baochai came to see her, spoke heart to heart, said many gentle, private things, and even sent over fine bird's nests to build up her health. All at once Daiyu let her guard down, and from then on the 2 became sisters who shared their hearts. You see, even this pair, rivals in love to outside eyes, turn out not to be black and white. Baochai is no villain, and Daiyu is no petty thing, they're just 2 girls, both proud, both helpless about their own fates. That's the most remarkable thing about this book, you can hardly find a single true villain, everyone has their own hard place. Among these girls there are a few more you'll remember by their look, even if you can't keep their names. There's one called Xueqin, big-hearted, open, who once drank too much and simply fell asleep on a stone bench in the garden, petals all over her, butterflies and bees circling around, one of the rare, utterly guileless, happy souls in the whole book. And there's one called Miaoyu, a young woman in religious life, living off in a corner of the garden, so aloof it's almost cold, even the water she brews her tea with has to be snow she gathered years ago from plum blossoms and kept buried in the ground. That's Chao's gift, hundreds of people, and he makes every one of them their own, no 2 alike. The good in this garden wasn't only the young ladies. Baoyu treated the maids around him with real tenderness too. One maid accidentally snapped a fan and feared a scolding, but Baoyu actually said, things are made to be used, if it makes you happy to tear them for the crisp little sound, then tear away. And he let her, snapping good fans one after another into crisp cracks, both of them laughing. In that bit of nonsense lies his rarest quality. In a world that ranked people into high and low, in his eyes a maid was also a living person, worth caring for. And because he cared like that, what later becomes of these girls hurts all the more. The one who is Daiyu's exact opposite is Baochai. If Daiyu is a knot of feeling that never quite loosens, Baochai is the seamless girl everyone speaks well of. She's poised, steady, good with people, the elders love her, and even the servants praise her. The book gives her a pretty image too. On a bright clear day, Baochai, fan in hand, chases after a butterfly, and for that one moment, even she lets out the liveliness of a young girl. But most days, she's a person who buries her own heart very, very deep. Baochai has a golden locket, and the words on it happen to make a perfect match with the jade Baoyu wears. So a saying grew up, the gold and jade match, the locket pairs with the jade, and Baochai and Baoyu are the heaven-made couple. But don't forget, between Baoyu and Daiyu there's the stone and wood pact, made up in heaven. One is the gold and jade match the whole world approves of, the other is the stone and wood pact written into fate. From here, those two threads twist together, Baoyu caught in the middle, and Daiyu's tears now have a reason that never runs dry. There's one more figure in this garden you absolutely cannot skip, nothing like those gentle girls, Xifeng. She's the young manager wife of the Jia house, sharp, fierce, sweet-mouthed and hard-hearted, holding several hundred people, top to bottom, neatly in her two hands. How capable is she? When the Ning house had a funeral and everything fell into chaos, they brought her in to run it, and in a few words she set the rules straight. Whoever slacked got punished, clean and decisive. But she's ruthless too. Behind the scenes she's caused deaths, grabbed power, squeezed money, dared anything. But remember her verse? She schemed too cleverly by half, and schemed away her own dear life. Wang Xifeng is exactly that kind of person, who calculated everyone, whose abacus clattered non-stop, and who in the end calculated herself right in two. The harder she pushed, the tighter she gripped, the more completely it all came apart in the end. Do you know anyone like that? Has to control everything, terrified of losing the reins, worn to the bone, yet never able to let that breath go. A person like that should really lie back and listen to tonight's book. And the capable girls in this garden weren't only Xifeng. There's the third young lady, Tanshun, who, while Xifeng was ill, was pushed forward to run the household for a stretch. Don't let her youth fool you. She handled things with method and nerve, cutting waste and opening new ways, until even the old, worldly serving women didn't dare look down on her. The pity is, she was a girl, and a concubine's daughter at that, so however much skill she had, she couldn't hold up a mansion already sinking. She said something sharp and exact: a great family like ours can't be killed from outside in a day or two, it has to rot first from the inside, one piece at a time, before it falls. Those words, later, came true to the letter. There's another moment Chao wrote almost like a prophecy. A young wife of the Ning house, Xueqin, came to Xifeng in a dream before she died and said a few words that send a chill down your spine. Roughly, right now our family is all roaring fire and blooming flowers, but remember, the full moon wanes, what peaks must decline, better to leave a way out early. Set aside some sacrificial fields, set up a family school, so that when the fall really comes, the children at least have a bite to eat and books to read. But no one truly took it to heart. When the days are at their reddest, who wants to think about the day of ruin? With that one stroke, the whole ending of the Jia family is quietly pressed down beneath its most splendid years. Into all this liveliness comes one wonderfully down-to-earth figure, Granny Lu. She's a poor old countrywoman, distantly related to the Jia family by the thinnest thread, who, because things at home had become unlivable, steeled herself and came to ask for a little help. The moment this rough, rustic old woman walks into the grand view garden, it's like a mirror held up to all that towering wealth. Once, over a crab feast, she quietly did the math in her head: the cost of this one meal would keep a farming family like hers fed for a year, with some to spare. The Jia people thought her a bumpkin, made fun of her, had her say coarse things at the table to amuse everyone, and she didn't mind, played along cheerfully, while staying clear as a mirror inside. Don't underestimate this old woman. Later, when the Jia family fell, when the tree came down and the monkeys scattered, the daughter of that once mighty Wang Xifeng landed in trouble, and it was exactly this Granny Lu, the one they'd laughed at, who stepped forward and saved the child. Chao buried this stroke deep. The plain, kindly person you look down on day to day is often the very one who catches you when it counts. In fact, in the Jia family's most glorious years, just the display at a festival could dazzle your eyes. At the Lantern Festival, hundreds of lanterns hung up, operas sung, fireworks set off, old and young filling a whole room, laughing deep into the night. But if you listen closely, you'll notice Chao always tucks a cold little line into the liveliest spot, letting the wise old matriarch start a joke, only to have it cut off halfway by firecrackers crackling outside. That's exactly how a peak works. The noise reaches its height, and underneath, the string has already, quietly, begun to loosen. The old phrase roaring fire, blooming brocade sounds like the finest thing, but at the bone, it means this is the end of the road. We're about halfway through tonight. While it's quiet, let me thicken my skin and ask you one small favor. If this voice has kept you company, just tap like, and tap subscribe. Think of it as adding a little oil to this lamp in the dark. No need to open your eyes, it's a one-finger thing, do it and forget it, and it's fine if you don't. Alright. Let's keep walking. Only from here, the road starts heading downhill. However lively the first half was, the second half is just as cold. The good days in the Grand View Garden have an end. First, some ugly things happened in the garden, and it was searched and ransacked once, and that layer of cleanness broke. Then the family's backers on the outside fell, one after another. Yuanchun died in the palace, and the biggest tree snapped first. Finally, one day, men from the court came to the door and seized the Jia estate, almost exactly what happened to Chao Xueqin's own family. And with that seizure, the towering wealth was empty in a single night. Earlier still, there was that one search of the Grand View Garden, and it chills you too. It was night, and Xifeng led a group room to room, turning over chests, searching the maid's private things. A fine garden, the sisters' own playground, in one night turned to suspicion and fear, everyone watching their own back. Some girls were wronged on the spot and driven out. The fierce ones would rather dash themselves to death than take the shame. From that night on, that cleanest layer in the garden never came back. Slowly you'll taste a truth in it. A family's collapse often doesn't come battering in from outside, it starts inside, when people first grow confused, then suspicious, then hard-hearted. There's a line in the book that says all of this scattering, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. The great tree comes down, and the monkeys in its branches vanish in a rush. The people who once circled the Jia family flattering and fawning gone. The maids and servants, some dead, some sold, some fled. Tanchun was married off far away, with no road back. Yingchun was given to a man like a wolf and ground to death before long, and one vivid girl after another, just as those albums in the land of illusion foretold, withered away, each according to her fate. The hardest scattering to bear, really, is the maids. Baoyu had a maid named Qingwen, lovely, fierce, with a tongue that spared no one, and just for that, people gossiped her down, and she was driven out alive, dying of illness within days, with not even a mouthful of clean water at the end. These girls have no verses, no grand scenes, but as they vanish one by one, you truly feel it. When all that splendor came crashing down, what got crushed were the most vivid, the ones who least deserved to be lost. And that most heart-wrenching love came to its end too. When the family chose a bride for Baoyu, the elders waited back and forth, and in the end they chose not Daiyu, but steady, sensible Baochai. The gold and jade match won out over the stone and wood pact after all. By the way the last 40 chapters tell it, they even kept it from the sick Daiyu and used to switch. When Daiyu caught wind of it, all hope died in her, and she burned the poems she'd once exchanged with Baoyu, page by page. On the very night Baoyu married Baochai, Daiyu wept her last tear and breathed her last. Do you remember? She came in the first place to repay tears. Once a lifetime of tears was wept dry, the debt was clear, and so it was time for her to go. Daiyu's death is no accident, it was the ending written from that bond in heaven. As for Baoyu, though he married Baochai, half his soul seemed pulled out of him, and from then on he was dazed and half-mad. The one who repaid tears was gone, the one left guarding an empty room remained. A jade belt hangs in the wood, a gold pin is buried in snow. That verse, set down so early, here comes true, every word. By the way, I should say more about that magic jade of Baoyu's. It isn't just a pretty stone, the book makes it his very lifeline. Once the jade is lost, he goes vacant and half-witted. And it was exactly when that jade went missing for a time that Baoyu turned mad, and the family used the gap to switch his bride and marry him off. Look back and think, that jade was the very stone from heaven, the one never used. It went along with Baoyu for this one trip, saw all the worlds gathering and scattering, its love and its pain, and once it had seen enough, the jade returned to its place, and the man, too, should wake. The stone came down to watch a dream, the dream over, of course it goes home. The story's end is a great snow. The Jia family did flicker back to life a little later, and Baoyu even passed the examinations. But just when everyone thought he'd rebuild the house, he walked away. The book paints an image you can't forget: between heaven and earth, one vast white snow, Baoyu bareheaded and barefoot, wrapped in a cloak of deep red felt, in the snow, bowing several times toward his father from far away, and then walking off, light as air, with a monk and a priest, never once looking back. That stone, which once begged to walk through the human world, having seen its fill of all this splendor and ruin, returns in the end to the place it came from. There's a line that is the whole book's landing point, and it left behind a stretch of white earth, vast and clean. Taste it, all the striving, all the love, all the scheming and splendor, in the end are covered by one great snow, clean and bare, with nothing left. A whole book of liveliness, and the ending is an emptiness in a field of snow. Alright, now we can untie that thin thread by your pillow. This book told you the ending so early, so why do you still turn the pages, one after another, until it aches inside? Because what we're reading was never that ending, the scattering. What we read is the gathering, the poetry clubs in the Grand View Garden, the laughter, the small heart flutters of young people, the inch-by-inch living color of splendor while it lasted. To put it another way, Dream of the Red Chamber isn't teaching you how to dodge loss. It told you long ago, you can't dodge it, no one can. What it makes you see is this: knowing it will scatter, was that gathering still worth it? The answer it gives is hidden in every person who truly lived. Daiyu really loved, really wept, Baoyu really protected, really hurt. Even if the end is empty, those moments of true heart truly happened. And that is enough. So some people say Dream of the Red Chamber is a book that teaches you how to say goodbye. In one life, there's so much we have to send off: friends who drift apart, parents who grow old, feelings that change, good times that pass. Red Chamber takes this hardest thing, breaks it down gently, and tells it to you softly: when you gather, gather well; when it's time to scatter, don't hate it too much. It has no stiff, grand lecture. It just keeps you company, and lets you rehearse, lightly, in a book, the one lesson none of us can escape: losing. That song of One and Done from the opening sings that good is done, and done is good. The world's fame, silver, children, however tightly you grip them, in the end must all be let go. The words sound cold, but chew them slowly in the dark and they turn warm. It isn't telling you not to love, not to strive, it's gently patting your shoulder. The things you can't put down today, grip so tight, kept awake by them, one day, you'll have to loosen your hand on them too. So why not loosen it a little now, and sleep well? So this book, which looks like the rise and fall of one great family, is, at the bone, written for everyone who was afraid of losing. If tonight you're gripping something you don't dare let go of, a love, a bit of standing, something you absolutely must get done, what Dream of the Red Chamber wants to tell you is this: flowers bloom and fall, people gather and scatter, it's no one's fault, it's just the way this world is. You don't have to wear yourself dry trying to hold on. Tonight, let that great snow cover the day's striving and fear, lightly, all of it. Before you sleep, a small question for you. Among this crowd of Jinling girls, weeping Daiyu, careful Baochai, fierce Xifeng, far-married Tanchun, which one do you ache for most, want most to protect? Don't rush to answer, tell me in the comments when you wake, and I read every one. If you like nights like this, subscribe to the channel, and give that little bell a tap. Next time, we'll read Water Margin. Red chamber is the tears of a house full of girls behind deep walls. Water margin is the fists and the wine of 108 men out on the rivers and lakes. From the Grand View Garden to the marsh of Liangshan, tomorrow night, we change rivers again. Let the lamp stay dim, and pull the blanket up. The splendor of the Grand View Garden, that vast white snow tonight, none of it has anything to do with you. You don't have to hold on to anyone, don't have to calculate anything, don't have to settle some matter tonight. Baoyu's jade, in the end, went back too. Your heart tonight can be set down for now. Whatever you can't put down, leave it for tomorrow. In this moment, you don't have to grasp a single thing. Close your eyes, that's all. This is Bedside Book Voice. Good night, see you in the pages.